The water arrived quietly at first. Just a thin stream sliding across the grass like it had every right to be there. But within weeks, Oliver Grant realized something strange was happening in his backyard. Every storm, every heavy rain, his yard turned into a shallow lake, and the shocking truth behind it would soon expose something the entire HOA tried to hide. Oliver had lived in the peaceful Lakeside Ridge neighborhood for 6 years. It was the kind of place where lawns were perfectly trimmed and neighbors waved politely from their driveways. For a long time, everything felt simple and calm, until the flooding started. At first he thought it was just bad drainage. Maybe the soil needed aeration. Maybe the slope of the land was wrong. So he spent weekends fixing things himself. He installed small drains. He added gravel channels. He even planted water-absorbing shrubs along the fence line. Nothing worked. The water kept coming. Then one evening after a heavy rain, Oliver noticed something unusual. The water wasn't just pooling randomly. It was flowing in a clear direction, straight from the HOA clubhouse hill. The clubhouse sat on slightly higher ground behind his property. During storms, water streamed down the slope like a miniature river, cutting across his lawn and leaving muddy trails behind. Within minutes his grass would disappear beneath inches of murky water. It didn't make sense. Neighborhood planning rules were supposed to prevent exactly this kind of problem, so Oliver did what any reasonable homeowner would do. He contacted the HOA, but the response he received was colder than the floodwater filling his yard. They claimed everything was within regulation. Yet something about their quick dismissal felt wrong, because the next storm would reveal a detail Oliver never expected, and once he discovered it, the quiet homeowner decided he wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. The next storm arrived 2 weeks later. Dark clouds rolled over Lakeside Ridge, and the rain began falling steadily against rooftops and sidewalks. Oliver stood by his kitchen window watching the backyard carefully this time. He wasn't guessing anymore, he was waiting. Within minutes, the water appeared again, but this time he noticed something he had missed before. The stream pouring into his yard wasn't natural runoff. It was too straight. Too fast. Too controlled, almost like it had been engineered. Curious and uneasy, Oliver grabbed a flashlight and walked along the fence that separated his yard from the grassy slope behind the HOA clubhouse. Rain soaked through his jacket as he followed the flowing water uphill. And that's when he saw it, a large metal drainage pipe sticking out from the ground behind the clubhouse. Water blasted from it like a fire hose. It rushed straight down the hill, through a narrow channel carved into the soil, and directly into Oliver's yard. The HOA hadn't just ignored the flooding problem, they had created it. Someone had built a drainage system that redirected stormwater away from the clubhouse parking lot. And they sent it straight to his property. Oliver stared at the pipe, stunned. Every storm, hundreds of gallons of water were being dumped into his backyard so the clubhouse could stay dry. The realization hit him slowly: they protected their building by sacrificing his yard. The next morning Oliver sent photos and videos to the HOA board. Their response came quickly, but it wasn't an apology, it was a warning. They claimed the drainage system had been installed years ago and was perfectly legal. They also suggested Oliver improve his landscaping if flooding bothered him. The message ended with a short sentence that felt like a challenge: the matter is considered closed. But Oliver wasn't finished yet, because while the HOA believed the problem was over, Oliver had just started planning something they would never expect. For the next few weeks, Oliver said nothing to the neighbors. It looked like he had simply accepted the situation. The flooding continued during storms, and the muddy patches across his lawn grew wider with every rainfall. The HOA board likely assumed their warning had worked, but Oliver wasn't ignoring the problem. He was studying it. Each time rain arrived, he carefully watched how the water moved. He measured the slope of the land. He mapped the path of the drainage channel from the clubhouse pipe down to his backyard. Slowly, a pattern became clear. The entire system relied on one simple fact: gravity. The pipe dumped water downhill because the land sloped toward his property. But Oliver noticed something interesting while reviewing the neighborhood layout. The slope continued past his yard. Farther downhill, the land curved back toward the clubhouse parking area. It was subtle, almost invisible, but the terrain formed a natural loop, which meant something very important: water could flow the other way too. Oliver spent evenings researching drainage laws and property regulations. What he discovered surprised him. The HOA had the right to manage stormwater for their property, but they could not intentionally redirect water in a way that damaged another homeowner's land, and that was exactly what had been happening. Still, Oliver didn't want a legal fight. He wanted something simpler, something undeniable, something that would make the HOA understand the problem instantly, so he started working. With a few landscaping tools, gravel, and several adjustable drainage barriers, Oliver began quietly reshaping the edge of his yard. Neighbors walking by assumed he was repairing flood damage, but Oliver knew the truth: he was preparing a new path for the water. One that followed the natural slope of the land, and when the next major storm arrived, the HOA clubhouse was about to receive a lesson in gravity they would never forget. The storm forecast appeared 3 days later. Meteorologists predicted the heaviest rainfall of the season. Dark clouds gathered above Lakeside Ridge, and the neighborhood prepared for another long night of rain. Inside his home, Oliver finished the final adjustments to his drainage channels. The work had taken several quiet evenings. He had carefully shaped shallow trenches across the lower edge of his yard, lining them with gravel and guiding barriers. The design looked like ordinary landscaping improvements, but the direction of the channels told a different story. Instead of letting the water spread across his lawn, the trenches guided it toward a narrow exit along the side of his property. And from there, gravity would do the rest. When the storm arrived that evening, rain poured across the neighborhood in steady sheets. Oliver stood near the back window watching the familiar stream rush down from the clubhouse hill. Water exploded from the drainage pipe just as it always had. But this time, something changed. Instead of pooling across his yard, the floodwater slid neatly into the gravel channels. The trenches captured the stream and carried it smoothly toward the exit point Oliver had built. Within minutes, the redirected flow continued down the natural slope behind his house, farther and farther downhill, straight toward the lowest point of the neighborhood, which happened to sit just behind the HOA clubhouse parking lot. Oliver watched silently as the water followed the terrain he had carefully mapped. He hadn't pumped it, he hadn't forced it, he simply allowed gravity to complete the journey, and as the rain kept falling, the redirected stream grew stronger. By morning, the HOA board members would discover something very surprising. The same water they had been sending into Oliver's yard for months had finally found its way back home. And the clubhouse parking lot was about to experience the exact problem they had ignored. The rain finally stopped just before sunrise. Sunlight broke through the clouds over Lakeside Ridge, revealing the aftermath of the long storm. Oliver stepped outside and walked calmly across his yard. For the first time in months, the grass was dry, no muddy puddles, no flooded lawn. The drainage channels had worked perfectly. Curious neighbors soon began walking outside to inspect the neighborhood after the storm. Many of them noticed something unusual happening near the clubhouse. Cars were slowly turning around at the entrance. People gathered near the parking lot, pointing toward the ground. Oliver already knew what they had discovered. The redirected water had followed the natural slope behind his property exactly as he predicted. And it had collected in the lowest area near the clubhouse driveway. Large puddles covered sections of the parking lot. Nothing dangerous, nothing destructive, just water. The same amount that had been flowing into Oliver's yard for months. By mid-morning, the HOA board members arrived to inspect the situation. They looked confused as they examined the flooded pavement and the drainage pipe that had once sent the water downhill. Several neighbors quietly explained what they believed had happened. The water had simply followed gravity. Someone mentioned Oliver's new landscaping channels. Soon the HOA president walked across the grass toward Oliver's property. Her expression was serious. But Oliver simply stood beside his perfectly dry lawn. He didn't argue, he didn't complain, he just waited, because the next conversation would finally force the HOA to face something they had refused to acknowledge, and this time, the entire neighborhood was watching. The HOA president stopped a few steps away from Oliver's fence. Behind her, several board members examined the waterlogged edge of the clubhouse parking lot. Workers had already begun placing small pumps to clear the remaining puddles. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the president asked a careful question: "Did you change your drainage system?" Oliver nodded calmly. He explained that he had simply improved his landscaping to protect his yard from stormwater damage. The channels guided runoff safely along the natural slope of the land. Everything stayed within his property line. Nothing had been forced, nothing had been blocked. The water simply moved where gravity allowed it to go. A few neighbors nearby quietly agreed. They had watched Oliver working on the channels for weeks. One board member studied the hill behind the clubhouse again. The realization was becoming obvious. If the drainage pipe continued sending water downhill, the flow would eventually return to the lowest part of the property, which now meant the clubhouse area. The president sighed softly. For months the HOA had insisted the flooding was not their responsibility. But now the problem had reached their own building, and suddenly it mattered. Later that afternoon, a landscaping contractor arrived to inspect the entire drainage system behind the clubhouse. After reviewing the layout, he offered a simple recommendation: the pipe should be redirected into a proper underground stormwater system instead of dumping water onto private property. It was a solution that should have been installed from the beginning. By evening, the HOA board voted to approve the repair. Construction crews would start within the week. Oliver didn't celebrate. He simply watched as the workers marked the ground for the new drainage line, because the goal had never been revenge, he only wanted the water to stop destroying his yard, and finally, the HOA understood why. Within 2 weeks, the construction crews finished installing the new underground drainage system behind the HOA clubhouse. Large pipes now carried stormwater safely toward the city's proper runoff channels instead of dumping it downhill into someone's yard. The difference became clear during the next heavy rain. Clouds rolled over Lakeside Ridge once again, and the familiar sound of rainfall filled the neighborhood streets. Oliver watched from his back porch as water flowed across the hill behind his home, but this time, something had changed. The drainage pipe that once blasted water into his yard remained silent. Instead, the new underground system captured the stormwater and carried it away beneath the ground. For the first time in months, Oliver's lawn stayed completely dry. Neighbors began noticing the improvement as well. Several of them stopped by during the following days to thank him for pushing the HOA to fix the issue. Many admitted they had quietly worried about the drainage problem for years. Sometimes it only takes one person to finally speak up. Even the HOA board eventually acknowledged that the new system benefited the entire neighborhood. The clubhouse stayed dry, the yards below the hill stayed protected, and the long-standing flooding problem finally disappeared. Oliver never tried to embarrass the HOA or argue with the board. He simply allowed the situation to reveal itself. Sometimes the clearest solution isn't louder arguments or long legal battles. Sometimes it's letting people see the problem from the other side, and that simple shift in perspective can change everything. And that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you loved the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.